Hello everyone, welcome to the People's Bureau. Today I have a really interesting video for you. It's going to be a reaction to a podcast by Scott Galloway and Prof G Markets podcast. They had an economist, an Australian economist on, Justin Wolfers, who's done a couple of other things. He's kind of economics contributor to the social discourse and things like that. He's pretty popular online, and he had a really good conversation about AI, and specifically something that people don't talk a lot about ownership of AI, and I think that's really important for where we are in the world and where we're going, and kind of the AI politics narrative. So let's jump into it, guys.
Your thoughts on that scenario?
I happen to think that AI is the most interesting technology of my lifetime, and we may be on the cusp of one of the great technological revolutions. I also might be wrong. That's fine too. That debate is arguably the most interesting and most important economic debate. How to regulate AI, what role it'll play in our lives, how to cushion people for its impact, how to turbocharge it so that we get everything we want out of it. May be the most important economic debate of our lifetimes, and instead we're sitting around talking about tariffs. So no one in Washington is having a serious discussion, or across the country, because this has got to be a debate that brings everyone in. We need to hear from mums and dads and working class folks and middle class folks about their anxieties, their fears, their hopes, their dreams, so that we can shape this incredible beast that may be difficult to shape. And it's been 100% crowded out. So when we screw this up, it's because either we blame the White House for dangling shiny baubles in front of us, or we blame the media for staring at it rather than staring at the most important thing that's in front of us. And I'm guilty of staring at the White House rather than this. But I wish we had more time to dig into this, because I think it's really important. That's sort of just a prior statement. You talked about the incredibly high valuations of AI companies. Those valuations are essentially a bet that those companies are the backbone of the future of the economy. So therefore, they're a bet that yours and my life will be transformed by AI. It's less clear it's a bet that it'll be tomorrow, but that's market prices screaming, there's something intensely important over here. Let me now give the simplest possible way of describing why I'm an AI optimist. And then that'll get to the policy problems that come up. This, by the way, is so interesting. I wish can we do 2 hours next time?
We'd love to.
No one wants to listen. That's fine.
We'll listen.
But if I came to you and I offered you a robot that could do your job for you, does that make you better off? Ed?
I vote yes.
Yeah, it's not hard, right? You would let it wear the headphones, you'd shave the robot's head, and you, Ed, could be doing something else right now. You could be at the beach. And I would have sent a long-haired robot in to do my half of this interview. Scott looks a bit like a robot already. And we'd all be at the beach. I love the beach. Or whatever it is, whatever our higher passions were. Well, that robot more or less exists, and it's called AI. What an extraordinary moment we're in, where we'll be able to get the robot to do our work for us, and you and I can engage in finer things. We'll take up opera singing and poetry and body surfing. Now, let's take the same scenario. I invent a robot, but I sell the robot to your boss. How do you feel now, Ed? The robot can still do your job, but your boss owns it.
Not as good.
You're out of a job, brother. Penniless. Nothing to do. By the side of the road, right? The point here is these two scenarios have the same technology. A robot that can do your job. One of them is a land of plenty and beauty, where we're called to our higher callings, and the other is one of misery for many of us. What we have here is not a robot problem or an AI problem, but an ownership problem. So there's two things I want you to see here. One, the upside, if AI works, is just enormous. And two, the policy stakes The difference between immiseration and going to the beach, it's just one rule, one thing. Who owns the bloody robot? And in this metaphor, the robot is AI, obviously. So this is why I think this is the policy issue of our age. Now, by the way, when we talk about things like GDP, it doesn't matter who owns the robot, it's still adding to GDP either way. That's not a critique of GDP, it's just saying we've got all these other issues, distribution to think about as well. But if we do have robots that can do yours and my job, and Google's got something that produces podcasts now, and all this stuff, it frees us up to do incredible things.
I love this conversation.
Really important, really important things being said there by Justin Wolfers. You have to understand that AI in its current form is nowhere near able to do someone's job like that, right? He's talking about a future society, maybe a society that's in the near future, maybe in the relatively distant future. But it's really important to point out that it's not a matter of the moralization of AI. It's a matter of the ownership of AI, right? And it's so critical that AI is democratized. It's hypercritical because it's essentially a value creation or maybe even a value absorbing technology that, if concentrated, could be very dangerous to society. And he mentioned early on about how we're sitting here talking about tariffs and we're not sitting here talking about who's going to own this technology and policies around technology ownership. And that's very good for the current techno billionaire ownership class. It's very bad for the average person. And I'm not sure how to evaluate this situation because I use AI a lot. Everyone I know uses AI a lot. My dad uses AI a lot. And so if you look at it now, you don't really have a problem. It's of concentrated ownership. It is very democratized. You could create a startup that utilizes some AI and you could get rich off that or have social mobility, one might say. But when it gets to a point where it is doing everything that you can do, that's when it starts becoming interesting. And ironically, now is the time we need to decide that policy. Now, to be fair, there probably is a abstraction problem here as well, that because it's not 100% clear that AI will get to that stage, I think it will. I'm an AI optimist in the sense that I think that AI will continue to improve and it will absorb more and more functionality as it improves. And that functionality will in turn be lucrative for the owners of the AI. And so right now is so there is probably a little bit of an abstraction problem where people aren't 100% sure that AI will take their jobs completely like in this scenario. And because they're not 100% sure, that it's kind of too soon to be talking about policy. Like we don't really know we don't know what the policy should be because we don't know what the effects are going to be. Right? And so as the effects become more and more as they crystallize for us in front of our own eyes, then it will be easier to create the policy structure around governance of these systems and these robots or these AIs. That's true. I think there is a little bit of that. but it also behooves us to talk about it now when it's not an existential threat yet. And it doesn't have to be a threat. That's another thing. It doesn't have to be a threat. You know, I said existential threat, but I don't really mean it as a threat because, again, I do think that people will rise to the occasion in a sense to dictate the policies of the ownership of the structure of AI. And so that's very, I think this is a critical conversation to be having, and I think it's super important to be having this conversation, starting to have this conversation now, because it's going to affect us. And Justin Wolfers points out that it's not an AI problem, it's an ownership problem, and I think that's extremely important. And it wasn't something that I was on my radar before watching this episode. So let's move on here.
I'm so glad that you bring up the ownership question when it comes to AI. I am completely with you on this. AI is going to do wonders for the economy. And the question is, how can we have it such that all of us can have a participation in the massive wealth that is about to be created? And if we look at what has happened over the past several decades, it doesn't look great. The fact that the top 1% controls $25 trillion in equities, it's half of the entire S&P 500. The fact that the top 19 households own 2% of household wealth, up from 0.1% 40 years ago. So I look at it, I'm like, this is history would tell me it's not great. But then I look at what's happening in AI right now. And one of my biggest concerns is the fact that the most ascendant AI company that is now worth $500 billion is a private company. It is owned by a pretty short list of institutional investors. Many of them are basically the investment arms of big tech companies, and that is OpenAI. OpenAI is the company. If you want to participate, you should probably own a share of OpenAI, but you can't because it's not going public. And we're seeing this with all of the other AI startups too. We're seeing it with Anthropic as well. We're seeing it with Mistral. We're seeing it with even companies like SpaceX, which I think is going to be a big propeller of the economy. That to me is a concern because it very plainly says you cannot have this. Why? It's a complex reason, private markets, institutional investors, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is you can't participate in this. You can use the product, but you can't own the shares. Are you worried about that too?
Profoundly.
And this is another really good example. This is on a separate note about like legit, like physical ownership of these companies. And it's like another avenue for the average person to access ownership of these systems is to own equity in these companies. And these companies are all private companies. Google's not a private company, which I think matters because Google has some of the best AI systems and it's probably in the best position. But this isn't a finance channel. It's basically like an investors club. It's like you have to have a certain amount of assets to be able to buy equity in these companies in the private markets. And because they're not public, because they don't need to, because they have unlimited cash in the private markets, they can restrict ownership even further. And so it's a problem. And there needs to be a way to let individuals invest in these companies, just flat out.
So this idea that the role that AI plays in shaping our economy depends on ownership is central to what I was arguing and central, I think, to the story you just told. If instead of someone giving either you or your boss a robot, someone invents a robot, but then 3 other competitors spring up that have equally good robots, let's call them AIs. I'll stop using the robot analogy, right? And the marginal cost of producing more AI is close enough to zero. And these are in a competitive market. Now we're at a point that either you or your boss could buy someone to do your job for you, right? Price equals marginal cost is zero. So basically all the work's getting done. And the AI companies aren't getting rich, which means it's either you or your boss. And that's going to depend a lot on policy, which of those two it is. Okay, now let's tweak things. let's say that this is a winner-take-all market, that the best model is better than the second best model by enough that OpenAI, for instance, becomes a monopoly player, much the same way Google has in search. Well, if that's the case, now OpenAI can charge a very, very high price for the AI. It will charge, if Ed, you earn currently $500 a week, it will charge Scott $499 a week for the Ed robot. And Scott will buy that because it saves him $1. That means the employer doesn't get rich, the worker doesn't get rich, but the stockholders of OpenAI come to own the entire universe. And so that then says it's not just that it's an ownership problem, now we also have a competition problem.
And I kind of want to jump in there because this is a problem because and this is like an information technology problem because the ability to absorb the entire market, the ability for one company to absorb the entire market is there because there's no restriction on supply, right? So you say like, oh, because there's no competition, it's a winner take all market, and OpenAI is so much better, is significantly better than Google that everyone will just go to Google. Everyone will just go to OpenAI instead of using Google, and so OpenAI will basically absorb the entire market. And traditionally in economics, you might say, oh, that's not really possible because, well, there's like physical limitations on space. So that, like Google owns a certain amount of supply that they will always have like some kind of market share, right? Like OpenAI wouldn't be able to supply the entire market's demand because of just like a physical limitation that lets other players into the market to satisfy that demand, right? But because it's an information technology business, because there's no limit to its supply, it can just scale infinitely. Right? There's no scale, there's nothing intrinsic about the scale that's stopping one company from dominating the entire market because it's an IT company, it can just scale infinitely, and then you have this problem that we're talking about. So let's continue.
Right, if we don't have competition in the space for LLMs, then one LLM will come to own close to all of GDP. And I'm mildly overstating the case, but there's a lot of truth there, right? So that then says we need to maintain competition between LLMs, which is very hard because at the same time you need to maintain an incentive for innovation, and markets don't naturally deliver a large enough incentive for innovation. Let me make it more complex. Imagine you even succeed at getting OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, Anthropic all to continue competing. So then they're selling AI services at a very low price equal to marginal cost. But in order to train their models, they all need NVIDIA chips. That now makes effectively NVIDIA the monopolist. Now NVIDIA can quadruple the price of its chips, and it will effectively extract all of GDP. And so now, not only do you not get rich, and Scott doesn't get rich, and OpenAI doesn't get rich, the only people who get rich under this world now is NVIDIA. And so now, it's not just a competition problem, it's a market structure problem. I hope that I've avoided what Scott talked about earlier of wonks and nerds over complexifying this. I'm trying to make a very simple point, which is what's on the table here is enormous, it's potentially transformative, but who it delivers for, very small details can have very, very big effects. And that's why this is the most important conversation in economics that we're not having.
This is such
Very, very good points. And it's, people might say, oh, well, the level of economic value to be absorbed by these companies is overstated, et cetera. But is it, right? Like if AI is exponential in nature and can do everything that humans can do at a basically infinite scale, essentially infinite scale, then this is an extremely dangerous time for just like, it's an extremely dangerous time for companies to basically control everything about our reality in a sense, because like where where do humans fit into this? Like, if AI could do everything that humans can do at a basically infinite scale, where do humans fit into this? You know? So I do have some opinions on like the abundance theory. Like, I do think there is a level of abundance that could be um, seen from this. Like the Elon Musks of the world will say, like, oh, this is basically going to create a hyper abundant society where everyone will get everything they want for free, basically, because economies of scale will push everything towards zero. I don't know. I like to think that's possible, but it also could be very. We're in a dangerous time, I think, coming up. And the ownership of these systems, market competition, and the ability to invest in these companies, etc., is very important. So I think this is critical to understand, and I completely agree with Justin Wolfers that there isn't a bunch of people directing attention, misdirecting attention, but there is an effort to not talk about this and not talk about ownership of what we're creating right now. And there's a political incentive to not talk about how AI can help everyday people. It's more of how can AI increase shareholder value and eliminate jobs and automate things and make things more efficient. Everyone wants efficiency, everyone wants automation. But we need to understand that the people who are going to be affected by this are middle class and everyday people who need they need access to the prosperity that this is going to generate. Just simple as. And again, we're not having this conversation right now because we're talking about tariffs and we're talking about Trump right now is like Trump's UN speech and Tylenol and pregnancies. And it's just like this huge, like, look over here, or, you know, what we're doing is crazy. And it saddens me because the best thing that we could do right now would be to have someone in the presidency or someone talk about this, to talk about AI ownership, to talk about what it's going to mean for our society and what it's going to mean for our economy, and talk about policies that will help the everyday person navigate and be defended by their government from a world that we don't want to see. So this was a very interesting podcast. I highly recommend it. I'll leave a link below for the full thing. I think AI ownership is going to be probably the biggest issue for the next 10 years in our world, in our lives. And so, you know, hopefully you found something here insightful. And that's it for now, guys. Bye.